Hi, hello, happy Monday, and welcome back to The Library is Open. Darling, so I hope you brought your library card. Hi, welcome. So, this week I have mostly been, this past week I should say, deep in a binge fest of How to Get Away with Murder, which is on Netflix, I believe, but I'm sure you can get it elsewhere, which is absolutely amazing. Viola Davis deserves all of the awards for that, and if she didn't win them, then it's a miscarriage of justice. But this is about books, and I mention the TV I've been watching only to sort of heighten the contrast between what I've been reading and what I've been watching. And this is something of a, back with the tea, a special episode, in the sense that it's probably... It is the first one in which I'm going to talk about more than one book, with the exception of the episode I did for, regarding mental health, which was more of a sort of bonus episode. But this is a normal episode, it just features two books. And the reason it features two books is because I was reading them side by side, and I was sort of struck by... Not necessarily the similarity of content, but more the theme and I suppose the emotions that they evoked. So I thought rather than do two separate episodes, I'd maybe talk about them and show what those comparisons are and the crossover in terms of theme or narrative arc, so on and so forth. So I hope that's cool. And it also helps that they're both really quite short books, relatively speaking, although they both bear the classification of novel. So I shall tell you what they are. The first one is Ian McEwan's On Chesil Beach, which was actually gifted to me years ago by a lovely friend who is a musician. She gave me a pile of books. And Fred, there's some things here I think you might enjoy, and I've read a couple of them and sadly neglected them until now, but that's okay, because I think sometimes maybe you come to them, or come to literature, art, whatever, when you either need it or when you're ready to read it. Let's go with that. So Ian McEwan's On Chesil Beach, and the second book is called The Beautiful Summer by Cesare Pavese. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I had a Google and I couldn't find an exact pronunciation, so if I'm wrong, I do apologise. He was an Italian author, born in 1908, and sadly he took his own life in 1950, which is obviously always a tragedy, but I think this is a reissue. I saw somebody on Twitter talking about it, and I thought I'd pick it up. And this is a beautiful cover, isn't it? Look, that's gorgeous. It seems to be one in the series of Penguin European writers. I am planning to pick up another couple of them, because I want to diversify my reading a little bit more, to take in literature from other countries. So just a quick resume of the plot. So On Chesil Beach is set on the wedding night of Edward and Florence, who are living in the early 1960s, so 62, so sort of before the sort of advent of the pill and free love, and the pill has been invented and introduced, but it's sort of it's not going to come to play its role in the so-called liberation of the 60s until a little bit later. So they're still sort of living under that post-war 1950s rule of, manners and propriety and so on and so forth. So it's about their wedding night, and it's about how Florence is entirely ill at ease with the let's call it the physical act of consummation of the marriage. In fact, she has no, as she says it, no sexual feelings whatsoever, and she finds it disgusting, but she is deeply in love with Edward. And it's about his attempts to sort of steady his own nerves and lose his virginity, and it all sort of goes horribly wrong in this like clash of mangled emotions. In The Beautiful Summer, it's we have the character of Ginnia, who is a young girl in 1930s Italy, and in her words, it sort of feels like a perpetual holiday, an endless summer, as it were. And she takes up with an older woman called Amelia, who is an artist's model, and seems very sort of sexually experienced, and they come into contact with two artists called Rodriguez and Guido, and Ginnia falls in love with Guido, and it's sort of about how that plays out against the backdrop of Ginnia's coming of age, learning about herself, her body, and you know what love, either what love really is or what it means to her. Again, it doesn't have the happiest of endings, unfortunately. So I suppose what sort of struck me about both of these books is not only the issues of first love, as it were, but more sort of the discrepancies that come up when people are afraid to voice their true feelings or sort of own their own emotions, I suppose. In Chesil Beach, on Chesil Beach in particular, there's very much by the end this pervasive sense of what was lost or what might have been if only one or both of them had spoken about what they were truly feeling, but social pressure and propriety and so on and so forth prohibited that. And you're left with this sort of sliding doors scenario where you think, if only someone had said something or been able to communicate more openly, the outcome could have been so very different. You know, and it reminds me so much of how love and life in general is just a series of choices, and you know, there's a line that Stephen Sondheim has, his composer, in A Sunday in the Park with George, where he has the character of Dot say, the choice may have been mistaken, the choosing was not. So the fact that you had to choose whether to either voice or withhold emotion or go, stay, love, not love, it's the choice in itself may be the wrong one, but you have to choose. So I suppose it's a little bit about the obligations of being human and how, you know, it sort of runs contrary to the idea that everything happens for a reason. Sometimes the reason is because you had to choose, and that's not always for the best. It made me think a lot about, I think we romanticise a lot, don't we? Well, both books made me think this, the idea of first love. And there is something about it, and I don't necessarily mean that it's better than a more mature love. I think it's just because it takes on a significance because it feels like an awakening, I suppose. The idea that you go from being a singular person into a person who may contain multitudes or be something to someone else. There's some beautiful bits in on Chesil Beach where Ian McEwan talks about their attempts at intimacy, Florence and Edward, in such a way that really kind of evokes that awkwardness of learning to express love in actions that are known to you but not practiced. So you sort of have a vague awareness of what you're supposed to do, but then you have to sort of discover how that actually manifests you as person in that scenario, if that makes sense. So I'll just read a little bit here where he's kissing her, With his lips clamped firmly onto hers, he probed the fleshy floor of her mouth, then moved round inside the teeth of her lower jaw to the empty place where 3 years ago a wisdom tooth had crookedly grown until removed under general anaesthesia. This cavity was where her own tongue usually strayed when she was lost in thought. By association, it was more like an idea than a location. A private, imaginary place rather than a hollow in her gum, and it seemed peculiar to her that another tongue should be able to go there too. It was the hard, tapering tip of this alien muscle, quiveringly alive, that repelled her. His left hand was pressed flat above her shoulder blades, just below her neck, levering her head against his. Her claustrophobia and breathlessness grew even as she became more determined that she could not bear to offend him. He was under her tongue, pushing it up against the roof of her mouth, then on top, pushing down, then sliding smoothly along the sides and round as though he thought he could tie a simple up-and-over knot. So I think that sort of explains what I'm trying to communicate there, I think. That sort of probing, I suppose, that is both literal in terms of body parts and metaphorical in terms of discovering one another. Chesil Beach is far more explicit in its evocation of how love is practiced than The Beautiful Summer, which, I mean, given when it was published, is probably not surprising. So this was first published in Italy in 1949, whereas Chesil Beach is, I think, 2005? No, it's 2007, in fact. So obviously, while they're both novels set in the past, Chesil Beach is able to be more, as I say, explicit about its content than The Beautiful Summer. What I really like about The Beautiful Summer is not just that it's quick, but I think that's important because I think that does sort of mirror the brief intensity of a first love affair, which is in itself almost a definition of insanity, isn't it? It's a deviance from everything you've known until that point. But I think it's about that, you know, we all have memories of the past, or as children, or, you know, times in formative years, adolescence, I suppose, arguably, when it seemed like it was sunny all day, and the memories that you have are carefully edited. I suppose, again, that touches on themes that come up a lot on this channel, actually, which is probably because it's my interest. The idea of memory and nostalgia, and what about it is genuine recall and what about it is fabricated. And I don't mean fabricated maliciously or to an end, but I think that often in stories that we tell ourselves about things that happen to us, we massively editorialise to fit what we need that story to do. Like, if you have fond memories of your first love, for instance, you need the sun to have been shining every day. You need it to have been a beautiful, magical time that was, I suppose, your awakening, without sounding too cliche about it. And there's something about those sort of long, hot, restless days that give it a timelessness, isn't there? You know, because obviously the sun's out all the time, apparently, and the days are so much longer, so the light lasts longer, so time becomes something that is less truncated than it is in the winter when we have very few hours of light, and everything seems to move much quicker. Whereas, you know, the summer has possibilities. Think about the song "The Boys of Summer," which I think I'll link below. It's a good accompaniment to this. About how, you know, that line, "I can't tell you my love for you will still be strong after the boys of summer have gone." And the boys of summer represent that carefree love that almost feels out of real time. You know, it's like you could sort of I did a sound effect like a Duplo piece there. You could sort of lift a Duplo piece of time out like a little capsule and put it over here and go, that's not part of the main narrative of my life. And I suppose the sadness, and maybe sadness is the wrong word, the wistfulness in both of these is that, although you might feel that, you know, they're absolutely a part of your life. So what's quite interesting is on Chesil Beach, we get sort of 3 main chapters that deal with what actually happens on the night, the honeymoon night. And then the interspersing ones are about the courtship of Edward and Florence. What's really nice is there's a little bit where Edward's talking about his getting to know Florence's parents, who are very much a different class. Edward very much represents the working class in this novel, and Florence is certainly middle to upper middle class. And he talks about it through food, which is how we get the sort of clue. So Florence's family are called the Pontings, and there's this passage. Early on, he made an impression on the Pontings by claiming never to have been abroad except to Scotland to climb the 3 Munros of the Knoydart Peninsula. He encountered for the first time in his life muesli, olives, fresh black pepper, bread without butter, anchovies, undercooked lamb, cheese that was not cheddar, ratatouille, bouillabaisse, entire meals without potatoes, and, most challenging of all, a fishy pink paste, taramasalata. That was my not the quote. Many of these items tasted only faintly repellent and similar to each other in some indefinable way, but he was determined not to appear unsophisticated. Sometimes if he ate too fast, he came close to gagging. So I think what Ian McEwan's doing there is already setting up the 2 characters as diametrically opposed in their existing experience of life. You know, it's like Edward's eating Florence's existence in a way and coming to know her, which is all the more ironic considering that they're never able to know each other enough to make that work, because they can't admit the most fundamental thing that exists between them unspoken. I'd sort of tried to look for passages in The Beautiful Summer that I wanted to read aloud, because I don't want this to become one-sided. It just so happened that on Chesil Beach I was like, oh, Mark's that, talk about that, you know, so on and so forth. And I feel like The Beautiful Summer is more of something that needs to be taken as the full sum of its parts as opposed to individually in sections, because it sort of runs concurrently. It's a really quick read. I read it in like, I think 2 days, but that's because I was obviously juggling the 2. So that's less about, for me, it was less about isolating particular passages in the book that gave me pointers as to what I wanted to think about, and it was more about a sort of ongoing narrative without bits that you can pick out to go, this is this, and more sort of about the whole experience. Because it's quite unsettling in a way, because afterwards you sort of, well, I did, sat there and had to think about it and go, you know, nothing really happened, but at the same time everything happened, if that makes sense. It reads like the chronicle of a summertime, and yet by the end of it, Ginia is entirely different by the knowledge she now possesses, both of love, sex, and I suppose a sense of disillusionment in a way, which is the thing that both novels share. There's a promise, the promise of summer, I suppose, that, as we all know, is not always delivered by autumn. There's I don't want to go too deep into this, 'cause I'm aware it's niche, but a lot of the time in my work with, you know, the university and my academic capacity, I work with a series of critical thought called queer theory, and one of my favourite theorists is called Munoz. I'll link some information about him below, and he talks about how much is both found and lost in what he calls ephemera, which obviously is things you can't touch, things that are not tangible, they can't be held or put in a box in a museum to say this is proof that this happened. But there are moments that if you can just snatch them from the air are almost like evidence or vindication. It would be a bit like trying to display an emotion. You can't do that because they're not real objects, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. And he talks about it in terms of queerness, but I like to think about it in relation to these two books. Just read you yet another little bit from Chesil Beach, just to finish off. Occasionally, he would come to a forking of the paths deep in a beech wood and idly think that this was where she must have paused to consult her map that morning in August. And he would imagine her vividly, only a few feet and 40 years away, intent on finding him. Or he would pause by a view over the Stoner Valley and wonder whether this is where she stopped to eat her orange. At last he could admit to himself that he had never met anyone he loved as much, that he had never found anyone, man or woman, who matched her seriousness. Perhaps if he'd stayed with her, he would have been more focused and ambitious about his own life. He might have written those history books. It was not his kind of thing at all, but he knew that the Ennismore Quartet was eminent, was still a revered feature of the classical music scene. He would never attend the concerts or buy or even look at the box sets of Beethoven or Schubert. He did not want to see her photograph and discover what the years had wrought or hear about the details of her life. He preferred to preserve her as she was in his memories, with the dandelion in her buttonhole and the piece of velvet in her hair, the canvas bag across her shoulder, and the beautiful, strong-boned face with its wide and artless smile. And I think that sort of sums it up, really, isn't it? That ephemeral sense of what might have been and what wasn't. I suppose a bit like that film, isn't it? Sliding Doors with Gwyneth Paltrow. If not this, then this. How different life might have been. Just little forks in the road. Captured as snatches of possibly true, possibly falsified memories. So yeah, that was this week. Definitely thinkers. Would recommend both of them. If I had to recommend you towards one rather than the other, I'd go Chesil Beach. But then that really depends on, your personal taste, obviously, of course. But they are both very well written and both gave me stop to think moments. So there we go, the first double build episode ever of The Library is Open, darling. And now the library for this week is closed, kaput. Do leave your thoughts, comments, any ideas that I've brought up in this or that you want to discuss further down in the comments, and check the upcoming schedule for what's coming, next. I hope you have a fabulous week. As always, I appreciate you being here, and much love. Mwah. See you very soon.